strange experience for us. I hope we'll hear everything and we'll see everybody. And as Koba mentioned, the panel is quite important, taking into consideration the Caucasus Barometer experience and how CRRC managed to organize this event starting from 2003, I guess. So we'll now have 4 presentations from two from Georgia and 2 from the presenters in Armenia. And they will highlight some of the very important findings of the last wave in 2019, but also I guess we'll hear a lot about earlier findings, some comparisons, etc. The first speaker will be Dustin Gilbert, who is going to speak about the trust towards religious institutions, and I guess hypothesize how the church scandals affect the level of trust respondents report. So I would give the floor to Dustin, and looking forward to the 2019 level of trust in church.
Hi, Tina. Thanks for the introduction, and hi, everyone. Tina, great to see you after so long and emailing back and forth with a few different things. So let me just get my presentation up. And yes, as Tina mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about trust in institutions using Caucasus Barometer, and specifically trust in the Georgian Orthodox Church. And the basic thesis that I'm presenting today is that the church's scandals are hurting it a bit. How much, it's a bit unclear. But to do this and make this argument, I'm going to briefly describe the scandals that have been happening or surrounding the church in recent years, then describe my identification strategy, the methodology which I used to test whether a recent scandal surrounding pedophilia in the church and accusations that the Ilya II was engaged in said activities was whether or not that actually hurt trust in the church. And from there, I'll get into the findings, and also I'll present some new data that we've recently collected on trust in institutions following the COVID-19 crisis, particularly as it relates to the church. So for anyone watching Georgia, a lot of the scandals will be really familiar, but just to briefly enumerate them, on May 17th, 2013, there was anti-gay rights riots essentially in the streets of Tbilisi. And priests were in the fore of this and engaged in violence against the gay rights protesters on the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia. And this has been sort of an important moment, particularly in LGBT rights circles in Georgia, and something that was also sort of hampered the church in many ways. So a survey immediately done right after this took place suggested that 59% of people didn't think that the church leaders should have been there and engaged in violence. Aside from this sort of very salient event from 5 years ago, there was land sales on a regular basis for one lari. And just recently what happened is that the church was given 20 hectares of forest land around the churches throughout the country. Aside from this, the most recent scandal that we've all probably seen is around COVID-19. And what happened here is that the church kept opening. They weren't following government rules surrounding only allowing 10 people in a closed area at once, though they were engaged in social distancing and trying to do some harm prevention. And most importantly, they stayed open for Easter despite the government ban on being outside the home past 10 p.m. or past 9 p.m., sorry. But the one that I'm going to look at today is most focused on accusations that the Patriarch of the Georgian Orthodox Church, Ilya II, was engaged in pedophilia. And these accusations came about in October, November of 2019. And specifically, Petre Sava, who was a high church leader at the time, accused Ilya of this. And this came as quite a shock for Georgian society. Because Ilya II is generally, just the most trusted individual in the country on survey after survey that have been done about this, and the church is generally one of the most trusted institutions. And so in this context, at the same time, trying to see if I can get my next slide up. 1 second here. Okay, so we've seen a long-term decline in trust in the church. So in 2008, 75% of Orthodox Christians in Georgia said that they trusted the church fully. And that compares with 33% in October of 2019 when Caucasus Barometer was conducted. And you can see this slow but steady decline and shift from full trust to just trust. So during that same period, from 2008 to 2019, there's a rise in people saying that they trust the church from 15% to 38%. There's also a rise in ambivalence on this chart, right? So in 2008, 4% saying that they are neither trusting nor distrusting of the church compared to 21% in 2019. Now, it's a plausible hypothesis that these scandals are hurting the church, right? But it's very difficult to prove that without any sort of experimental evidence, and getting an experiment in is very difficult because how do you randomly assign a scandal to different people? But there was, during the 2019 Caucasus Barometer, a natural experiment actually. And the pedophilia scandal, which I described previously, so it occurred during Caucasus Barometer's fieldwork. And it occurred towards the end of Caucasus Barometer's fieldwork, but there was still enough Orthodox Christians interviewed before and after the scandal to compare them and see if there was a change in attitudes that was statistically significant. And so the way that I do this in this research is I use a multiple regression analysis with a dummy for being interviewed before or after this scandal. And that's the first analysis which I conduct. And the second analysis which I conducted was a matching analysis using the same premise, so combining the natural experiment before and after. But then, in addition to looking at people before and after, I used a process called multivariate matching with genetic weighting to ensure that it was comparing people who were similar to each other in terms of age, settlement type, years of education, whether or not they were working, their sex, and how well off the household was. And so the results of this analysis suggest that indeed there was a decline in trust in the church as a result of the pedophilia scandal. This is just a simple crosstab, and it shows before and after the scandal trust in the church, according to Orthodox Christians. And despite that small sample size after the scandal, the difference is statistically significant. And there's a 15 percentage point difference between people reporting that they fully trust or trust the church compared to after the scandal and before the scandal. When we put this into a regression analysis, we get that same 15 percentage point difference. And then with a matching analysis that compares those similar people to one another before and after the scandal, the difference actually increases to 17 or 18 points. To further explore who was affected, rather than just asking, was there an effect, I did the regressions in both analyses, looking at the interaction terms between different social and demographic variables that were listed in the analysis and the methods page above, as well as with two different types of religious behavior. And those two types of religious behavior are whether or not people fast often or always, and whether or not they attend church more or less often than once a week. And what we get is that in terms of the demographics, there was slight changes. People outside of Tbilisi were a little bit more affected than people in Tbilisi by the scandal in terms of the trust in the church. And then there was also people with more years of education were also a bit more affected compared to others. Aside from this, though, one of the more interesting findings here is that the multiple regression analysis and one of the two matched analysis suggests that people who fast often or always and people who attend church at least once a week were significantly more affected than people who did not. And so that means that this particular scandal, it had a larger impact on those people who are more engaged in religion in Georgia and more engaged in the Georgian Orthodox Church compared to those who are less engaged but still identify as Orthodox Christians. With this, with the fasting variable in particular, you can see that there's a large difference here and here. And so with this analysis, with the fasting, it's much less clear whether this is a reliable finding, because the people who fast often or always, when we compare demographically similar ones, we don't get a statistically significant effect in the matching analysis, though we get a very large effect in the multiple regression analysis. But here, when it comes to attending church at least once a week, we get a consistent finding, and that's that people who were attending church more often were more affected by the scandal, and there was a larger effect on their trust in the church. So finally, this is some data using from a project that we've recently conducted, and this was about COVID-19. And what we did is we asked the same question on trust as on Caucasus Barometer in 2019. And we asked about people's trust in the healthcare system, local government, parliament, police, president, and the religious institution which they belong to. And what we can see from the data is that following COVID-19, it looks like there's a slight shift in trust in the church towards, again, rather trust instead of fully trust. And then we don't see a change in ambivalence. We don't see changes in other areas. This data, though, the other thing that we see from this chart is that every other institution had large gains in trust following the crisis. Before putting too much into this chart, I would just highlight that we have different modes here. Although the question was the same, we're asking over telephone instead of asking face-to-face like Caucasus Barometer with this survey. And therefore, we should be pretty cautious. The other thing here, and with the other scandal that's really worth thinking about, is that this was happening. The survey question was asked right after the Easter scandal. Similarly, with the data I presented previously, what was happening is that we got the month before the scandal and then a few days after the scandal in terms of data. And so something that's a question that should be looked at in future research is whether these scandals actually have a lasting effect. It's something that we're not entirely sure of based on the data. And other data that we've collected since is a bit ambivalent on this point. So in terms of conclusions, based on this, what we can say is that the scandal around pedophilia had at least an immediate effect, likely, on trust in the church. And it appears that the COVID crisis may have also had some impact on trust in the church as well, though we're less certain about it. The effects in terms of the pedophilia scandal were much larger and greater on the religiously engaged. And so this is what we've seen so far from these scandals, but I think that this at least provides some support to the hypothesis that the scandals are at least partially to explain for the slow decline in trust that the church has been experiencing in recent years. So with that, thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll yield the floor to colleagues.
Thanks, Dustin. It's very impressive and very, very interesting. And please keep working because based on just based on your very first slide, something is definitely happening there. And I guess something similar can be found in other countries as well, because if I remember correctly, this trend in downward thrust is not Georgia specific, right?
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. And now we are moving to Tamu Nakhoshtaria and Rati Shumadze, who will tell us some news about how support for democracy is linked with liberal values in both Georgia and Armenia. Tamuna, Rati?
Actually, just a small correction, data is only for Georgia. Sorry.
Oops, sorry, the booklet I had says Armenia as well.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Next.
Okay, Georgia.
Okay, let me just share the screen first. Yes, so hi everyone, I'm Tamar Khoshtaria and this is Rati, and we are both researchers at CRRC. Today we would like to present a paper that we wrote for the Caucasus Analytical Digest and will be published hopefully this summer. It's about exploring the links between support for democracy and liberal values in Georgia. So today we'll talk about the aim and context of the study, then I will also talk about the methodology, and Rati will follow with findings and the discussion part. So we wanted to look at support for democracy in Georgia and also look at the factors that are related to it. And since we both work at CRRC, we used CRRC's Caucasus Barometer Annual Survey. We took the 2019 data and we examined whether support for democracy is linked with core values of liberal democracy. In this case, we used support for gender equality and tolerance towards minorities as proxies to measure liberal democracy. And before we show you the findings, just a small overview of the situation in Georgia. So on the slide, you can see CB data starting from 2011 to 2019. And you can see that the positive assessment of the state of democracy is decreasing. If you look at the green color, it's the percentage of people in Georgia who say that Georgia is a full democracy or democracy with minor problems. And you can see that with years, this percentage is decreasing. And also, if you look at the orange color, it's the number of people who say that Georgia is a democracy with major problems, and you can see that it has increased from 27% in 2011 to 48% in 2019. Also, we asked the respondents to choose one of the statements presented on the slide. So democracy is preferable to any other kind of government, presented in green. You can see that the share of people who claimed or who chose this answer option has also fallen from 65% in 2011 to 49% in 2019. Now let's also look at how Georgians perceive democracy, what they think democracy means. This slide is presented from a survey that CRRC did for NDI in 2019. So people said that democracy means freedom of speech, media, hearing different views. 54% claimed this, and also about 1/3 of Georgians think that democracy means equality before the law, protection of justice, protection, defense of human rights. So if we look at this slide, we know that people do link democracy and the liberal values. But what we wanted to look at is whether the support for democracy is also linked with support for liberal values. And for this, we ran multiple logistic regressions. We have 5 different models. In all 5 models, the dependent variable is always support for democracy, and the independent variables are liberal values, as we already mentioned. It's proxies for liberal values, tolerance towards minorities, and support for gender equality. Now I will just show you in detail what the independent and dependent variables are. So the dependent variable is a dummy variable, which with score 1 standing for people who said that democracy is preferable to any other kind of government, and all the rest of the people who said in some circumstances a non-democratic government is preferred, or for someone like me it doesn't matter, or who said I don't know or I refuse to answer. All these people would get a score 0, so no explicit support for democracy, versus the code 1, which is support for democracy, which is presented in green. Now for the independent variables, we have several of them. So in the first model, level of tolerance towards ethnic minorities, which is measured by an additive index of approval of women of the respondent's ethnicity marrying a number of ethnic and religious groups. So if you look at the question, it's the question that was asked was, would you approve or disapprove of women of your ethnicity marrying a group or ethnic or religious group? And all the people who disapproved of women of their ethnicity marrying a man of any of the 17 groups listed here, they would get a score 0, and someone would get a score if they approved of women of their ethnicity marrying one of the representatives of the groups listed here. And of course, score 17 would be someone who approved all of these groups. For the second independent variable in the second model, it's intolerance towards homosexuals, which is driven from the following variables. So we asked people which of these people would you not wish to have as your neighbors most. So core 1 would be a person who named homosexuals as the group that they would least like to have as neighbors, and the respondents who named any other group would fall into the score 0. So it's a dummy variable. The third independent variable is level of liberal attitudes towards women, which is measured through an additive index of acceptance of certain behaviors by women at certain age. So we asked, from what age do you think it is acceptable for a woman to drink alcohol, strong alcohol, smoke tobacco, live separately from parents before marriage, have sexual relations before marriage, cohabit with a man without marriage? So if someone named a specific age when it is acceptable for a woman to do the listed activities, they would get a score 0, but they would get 1 score or 2 or up to 5 scores if they say it is unacceptable for a woman to engage in any of the 5 activities. The fourth and fifth model have attitude towards gender equality as independent variables. And in the first case, it's measured by approval of a man and women sharing equal breadwinning roles in the families. For example, we asked, in your opinion, ideally, who should normally be a breadwinner in Georgian families? And if someone said that men and women should equally be breadwinners, they would get a score 1. But if they named a man or a woman as a preferred breadwinner, they would get a score 0. And the fifth independent variable also measures attitude towards gender equality, but with the following question. So we asked, imagine that there's a son and a daughter in the household, and the household only owns 1 apartment. Who should inherit the apartment? So if someone said that the apartment should be equally distributed, they would get a score 1. And if they named a son or a daughter, they would get a score 0. So these are the main 5 independent variables, and we tested the relationship between support for democracy and these 5 proxy measures. But in addition to these core independent variables, we also included in each model the demographic variables like age, gender, settlement type, number of years spent in formal education, also employment status, and ethnicity. And now I think Rati will present the findings.
Thanks, Tamuna. As Tamuna described, we run 5 different models where in each case dependent variable was dummy support for democracy, including this covariates of social demographic variables, plus each independent variables described by Tamuna in details. So the first model we want to discuss is association between tolerance index and preferability of democracy over any other kind of government. And here the predicted probabilities are presented, and as you can see, it doesn't matter what score does a person has on this constructed additive tolerance index, whether it's the lowest or the highest. There are no statistically different and distinguishable differences between different levels of support for democracy. Just to explain it, if a person gets 0 point on the tolerance index, the probability of support for democracy is around 48%, and when it comes to the highest possible score, the predicted probability is 42%. So there are no statistical significant differences. The second model is sectional minority intolerance against support for democracy or preferring democracy. And here it doesn't matter what positions people have towards the sexual minorities. The predicted probabilities are indistinguishable, 51 or 52%, and there are no statistically significant differences. The third model shows us a relationship between acceptance of women activities, and like it was shown in the previous 2 models, the different levels of acceptance of women's engagement in different types of behavior, like consuming of strong alcohol or living and cohabiting with men without marriage, and so far and so forth. So there are no statistically significant differences, even though there is a 7-point gap between the lowest and the highest points on the index. The regression model, which is controlled with these social demographic variables, also indicates that statistically those indicators are not different. And the last 2 variables, last 2 proxies for liberal values discussed were so-called attitude towards gender equality, who should be a breadwinner in the family, or which child, the male or female, should inherit a property of a family. And again, as the numbers show, the margins between different attitudes and support for democracy are very, very minimal and statistically indistinguishable. So just to summarize all 5 models in one chart, we presented the average marginal effects with a 95% confidence interval. And as you see, so I will try to use a pointer here. So as you see, none of those 5 proxy measures for liberal values tend to show the statistically significant difference when it comes for support for democracy. So there are only a couple of variables that shows us differences regarding the support for democracy. The first one is ethnicity. So the people, respondents who are Georgian in their ethnicity, who report that their ethnicity is Georgia, it has a higher probability for support for democracy as a best way of governance. And the second one is the years in education. So how should we interpret this chart? So the longer person studies at the formal educational settings, he has higher probabilities or higher chances for reporting that he prefers democracy for any other kind of government. Also, the third important associate and correlate with support for democracy is the settlement type. But as you can see, that out of 5 models, it works only in 4.1. And the differences are not too significant in importance. So how should we interpret it? So here the base category is capital, and capital dwellers compared to the urban population have a higher probability to report that they prefer democracy over any other kind of government. So the key so to go to the conclusions and discussions part of the presentation. So the key findings suggest that none of the proxies for liberal values were had a significant association with democracy support, and the only significant predictors for democracy support were education, years spent in formal education setting, and ethnic minority status. So how can we interpret or discuss those findings? So now we are stepping in the realm of interpretation and the realm of further research, but I guess it's interesting to see what could be the further implication of the study. So results may suggest that people simply claim to be supporters of democracy without really knowing or being ready to accept the core values. Even though we presented in the start the chart from the NDI slide, the key and the most significant associations that people had towards the meaning of democracy were freedom of speech and freedom of expression, but none of the values associated with the acceptance of minority or gender equality variables were mentioned. So we can speculate that it may suggest that people are just going along with the idea of democracy without agreeing its standards or values. The studies in the post-socialist countries have shown us that support for democracy may be conditioned by instrumental factors. So what does this mean? What does it mean? So people can support democracy because they think that it's an instrument to reach the goal of economic prosperity or improvement of quality of life. And we think that examination of those factors may shed a further light on this issue, what really determines and what really facilitates the genuine support for democracy, and what can be the explanation of this very interesting idea. Thank you very much for your patience, for the time, and we are looking forward for your questions, and please collect your questions, and we will happily answer them and discuss them during the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom and Rati. And again, it's very interesting, and it's still a lot to be considered. For example, the level of education, that kind of stuff can be added and explored further. There is quite infinite. Okay, something is wrong with my audio. Okay, so now we have Ella Karagulian, and we are moving to Armenia. We'll continue to talk about trust, and I guess Ella will tell us about trust to a number of institutions before and after the Velvet Revolution. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Ella. I'm a program manager at Caucasus Research Resource Center in Armenia. Today, we will be launching the Caucasus Barometer Armenia 2019-20 wave, which is not the only one, however, very awaited and most comprehensive data to also shed light on the changes that occurred due to the developments we had in April and May 2018 in Armenia, resulting what is now called the Armenian Velvet Revolution. Today we'll be looking at some selected variables of utmost interest in relation to the change in trust towards government and public institutions, as well as the position of the government and the future of Armenia as perceived by the Armenian society. So I will share my screen. Excuse me, I'm having trouble.
Ella, is it not working? You should share.
Mm-hmm.
You should be able to share it.
Yes, however, I beg your pardon, I have.
You can email me your presentation and I can share the screen and you can talk if this persists, this problem.
Okay, I think I will be able to share it now.
Okay, we can see it. Great. Please make it full screen and we can start. We can see it all right.
Okay, it's all set.
Yes, it's great. Please proceed.
So we will be looking at data, descriptive data that comes from mostly two waves, but also starting from 2008. Caucasus Barometer 2017 that took place in October 2017. A few months later, following this, there were the events of the Velvet Revolution in May 2018, and now 1.5 years later, we have the second wave. So just a quick, let's go back and see how it all started. In December 2015, a constitutional referendum was held in Armenia, transforming the semi-presidential system to a parliamentary republic, which would a few years later in the upcoming elections would result in the then current president to be re-elected as a prime minister for the third term. In addition to this, the growing distrust towards the government in Armenia escalated in April-May 2018, which was also very visible from the Caucasus barometer, all the waves that starting from 2018, the levels of trust towards all public and government institutions, as well as the government itself, was declining. So it was very alarming, and it resulted in March 31, 2018, when the member of Armenian parliament and the head of civil contract party, Nikol Pashinyan, started a 2-week walking journey. Then 2 weeks after, Serge Sarkisyan was elected as prime minister by the National Assembly, was assigned, and the opposition, led by Pashinyan, announces the beginning of the Velvet Revolution, and mass demonstrations, rallies, street closures occupy Yerevan and the whole country. In May 18, after certain events, Nikol Pashinyan was elected prime minister. So there was a shift in the government. In the latest wave of the barometer, we asked the population whether they participated and how they participated in the events. So 31% of the population mentioned to be participating in protests, and 21 in blocking roads, which is quite a significant rate. The expectations, of course, were quite positive, and so far, after 1.5 years, the majority of the population still mentioned that their expectations have been met in regards to the events. What happened to trust? There was a very sharp increase in trust towards the government. So trust towards parliament went from 20% to 60%. Trust towards executive government increased sharply as well, and trust towards president went from less than 20% to 61%. 61.5%. Well, from this chart, we see that the trust in parliament has been declining since 2008, and now there is a sharp increase. However, it's still low compared to, for instance, the trust in president, or which went from 17 to 79%, or the trust towards executive government, which went from 20 to 71% within these 2 years. So to summarize, trust towards the president and the executive government peaked after the Velvet Revolution. Trust in parliament still lower in comparison, which also implies that amidst the change in the parliamentary government system, it's still there are still issues with regards to perceiving the role of the parliament. The trust towards government institutions, however, did not change that drastically. For instance, well, trust towards army has always been quite high. There was some increase in trust towards police and political parties. Trust towards court system did not undergo changes. We still have ongoing reforms in this field. So trust in police went from 29% to 51% within the 2 years. This was the most change, and in political parties, the distrust decreased from 65 to 44%. Trust in public institutions almost not affected. Trust towards media, religious institutions, healthcare system, educational system, as well as banks. There were some changes, but not as high as trust towards the government institutions. To summarize, trust towards the army was high before and after the Velvet Revolution. Police and political parties increases slightly. The court system is not much affected. Reforms are ongoing, and today we also had, we are now in the middle of very active events when it comes to the constitutional system court. Trust towards public institutions is not affected. Freedom of speech and the perceived level of freedom of speech increased quite high as well. As we see from the graph, whether people think that people like themselves have the right to openly say what they think dropped from 23 to 9%. Participation in protest actions has always been quite high, also leading to the events. As for the media, compared to 2017, those who think that media does a bad job in informing the population about what is going on dropped from 39 to 24%. So to summarize, the vast majority of the population mentioned they have the right to openly say what they think, which was 89% in early 2020. Since 2008, the need for participation in protest actions has been rising, peaking also towards the end of the period. And trust toward media increased since 2017. However, what did not change is the perception of issues faced by the country. Unemployment, poverty still remain the most issues of utmost importance. However, when it comes to corruption, it is no longer seen as a main issue. So corruption in 2008 was mentioned to be the main issue faced by the country by 21% of the population, whereas in 2019 by just 3% of the population. Amidst the ownership that the revolution brought to the population, people still think that government is like a parent. So the role of the government has not much changed. It had changed to some extent, going from 20 to 32% of people thinking that government is like an employee and people should be bosses who control the government. However, this change, however, still the more than half of the population thinks that people are like children and the government should take care of them like a parent. Well, this change when it comes to people being treated fairly by the government. There was a very sharp change in attitudes. So in 2017, 74% of the population disagreed that people are treated fairly by the government in Armenia, whereas in 2019 it's 25%. And the opposite went from 17 to 67%, with a raising 50 percentage points. And in 2019, 67% of the population thinks that the country is going in the right direction. The national politics is moving forward, whereas before 2019, this number was decreasing. So it went from 31% to 8% from 2008 and 2017. To summarize on a positive note, so people think that the situation in Armenia will improve and everything will be fine. 79% of the population mentioned so in 2019 as compared to 47% in 2017. So to summarize, the level of perceived fair treatment of the government towards people has increased drastically. However, the government is still more perceived as an employee rather as a parent. However, this increase is not very sharp. This nevertheless sets some seeds for considerations for the future, such as, do high expectations contain potential of possible disappointment in the future, which in some countries is common in in case of change of power. How will the current situation with regards to coronavirus pandemic in Armenia affect the perceived levels of trust and satisfaction? We are currently having quite an alarming situation with regards to the pandemic. As we see, it also affected the conference greatly. But also we have to check how this will, in a very short period of time, affect the levels of trust. And we have conducted one online survey a month ago when we also asked about the levels of trust towards various institutions. And we will be replicating this survey within 2 weeks, and we will be able to then compare the data and come back to this topic very soon. And finally, issues Armenia faces are still on the table. And what is the upcoming agenda? This is very important for consideration and future developments. Thank you.
Ella, thank you very much.
It will be.
And I hope the first changes you showed in trust towards parliament and president, the very first ones, the political institutions, They seem highly unusual, and I hope that you will continue to work on this direction and try to explain those changes, or probably design some experiments that Dustin loves so much, etc., because it does need to be explained. It's something extremely rare and strange, etc. So before we move to our last presentation, I would like to invite everybody to send the questions to the presenters. So far, we only had one very simple technical question, which I guess Dustin already answered, because he answers everything even before the question is posted. Thank you, Dustin. And now we are moving to the final presentation of this panel. Samuel Manukyan will discuss social distances between ethnic groups in Georgia based on very long data spanning over 12 years, I guess. Samuel?
Hello, dear colleagues. Do you listen me?
Yes,
Do you
yes.
listen?
Now, yes, we hear you.
Can I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Do you see my screen?
Yes, yes, yes. Ethnic groups. Yes.
Now I start. Do you listen me?
Yes, we hear you.
I thank CRRC for invitation to participate in this conference. I'm going to tell you about the main result of the study, about the perceptions of social distances toward various ethnic groups in Georgia by Georgians, Georgian Armenians, and Georgian Azerbaijanis during 2007 up to 2019. For research, we used the databases of Caucasus barometer surveys. In this presentation, we will look at the general comparison of the patterns of social distances in 2007 and 2019, the trends of social distances perceptions, and the latent structures in the worldviews of Georgians, Georgian Armenians, and Georgian Azerbaijanis, which condition the patterns of social distances. On this slide, you see in which years which ethnic groups were explored in Caucasus barometer surveys. Orange indicates the ethnic groups that are examined in all 7 studies, and blue indicates the ethnic groups studied in 6 or 5 studies. Note that these are the ethnic groups that are of the greatest interest for interethnic relations in Georgia and in South Caucasus as a whole. On this slide, you see the absolute and relative sizes of ethnic groups in the samples of Caucasus barometer in Georgia. They give a rough idea about the significance of results for Georgian Armenians and Georgian Azerbaijanis. Note that the subsamples of other ethnic groups in Georgia were not enough to study their perceptions. Now a little about methodology. We use the truncated variant of Bogardus scale for social distance. The quaternary equations for scale construction are the following. The first, can you please tell me whether you approve or disapprove of people of your ethnicity doing business with an ethnic group? And the second, would you approve or disapprove of women of your ethnicity marrying an ethnic group? Social distance is the count of answers approved. The ranges of the created variables are from 0 up to 2, where 2 denote the lowest distance. But we use the normalized and reversed form of that variables, received by use of the following formula. You see the formula. The range of the new variables are from 0 up to 1, where 0 is the least distance and 1 is the biggest distance. Now let's compare the patterns of perceptions of social distances toward different ethnic groups among Georgians, Georgian Armenians, and Georgian Azerbaijanis. Here you can see that at 2007, social distance perceptions of Georgians are clearly divided into 2 groups, Georgians and all the others. On the other hand, the others are divided into 3 groups. Among the others, the closest to Georgians were Russians, Greeks, Abkhazians, Ossetians, and Americans. And the furthest groups are Iranians and Turks. Armenians, Azerbaijanis, and Jews were between the two previous groups. The pattern of Georgian Armenians at 2007 is practically the same as of the Georgians. However, here the ethnic groups on the social distance scale are distributed more evenly. And the second peculiarity is that Armenians for Georgians are far ethnic group. You see here are Armenians, but Georgians for Georgian Armenians are Armenians, Georgians and Turks. The others are much further Georgians. Armenians are on the distance 0.8. But for Georgian Armenians, Azerbaijanis are on the distance approximately 0.5. Here are there. In 2019, perceptions of social distances of Georgians and Georgian Azerbaijanis go up and become closer. Let's note that in 2019, for Georgian Azerbaijanis, Georgian moved from close ethnic group from here to others, far ethnic group. You can, for your own, compare these patterns in detail when you take this presentation. They have a lot of interesting things, and however, in order not to lose time, let's move on to the next slides. This table shows the patterns of perceived social distances aggregated by all years of researches and by all groups of ethnic groups. On the slide, you see an explanation which ethnic groups are denoted as Caucasians, Europeans, and Asians. This slide is confirming the main conclusion of the previous slide. The generalized patterns of Georgians and Georgian Armenians are similar to each other and differ from the Georgian Azerbaijanis pattern. Now let's see the trends in changes of social distances. They are grouped into three groups: ethnic groups in Georgia, South Caucasian neighbors, Armenian Azerbaijanis, and regional neighbors, Turks, Russians, Iranians, and Americans. This slide shows the changes of the social distances toward Georgian Armenians and Georgian Azerbaijanis. The slide 10 toward Georgians and Kurds, and slide 11 toward Jews. The main messages are in the trends. Don't pay much attention on these figures. The trends are important. Please note that on all slides showing the trends, you will see that social distances perceptions of Georgian Armenians in 2019 towards all ethnic groups are sharply decreased compared with 2017. This may be a bias due to small sample size. One must be very careful during interpretation of this data. That is why for distances perceived by Georgian Armenians towards Georgian Azerbaijanis, we show two trend lines. First trend line with 2019 data, and the second trend line without 2019 data. With 2019 data, the trend is decreasing, but without that data is rapidly increasing. Here you see the social distances changes for Georgians and Kurds, and here you see for Jews. Now let's look on the trends towards Armenian Azerbaijanis, that is the South Caucasus neighbors. This slide shows trend in social distances in relation to Armenians and Azerbaijanis. We see that distance toward Armenians here among Georgian Azerbaijanis was very high, but there is a little trend of decreasing. The distance toward Azerbaijanis among Georgian Armenians is much lower. Here it is. Here it is. You can compare these values and these values. But if we exclude the 2000, if we consider all data, then trend is decreasing. This is the trend towards Azerbaijanis among Armenians. But if we exclude the 2019 data, then the trend is increasing. Now we will look on the trends of distances toward regional neighbors. In this slide, in order to show more adequate trends of social distances towards Russians among Georgians, we show two charts, the first chart and the second chart. The first contained data for 2007, and the second without it. There is no 2007. The war in 2008 sharply increased the social distance toward Russians among Georgians. Here you see, which in 2007 is very low. If we look at the trend of Georgians' perceptions with 2007 data, then we see social distance toward Russians is ascending. Here it is. If we look at the trend of Georgian perceptions without 2007 data here, then the social distance toward Russians is descending. Now let's look the trends towards Turks. Distance towards Turks among Georgian Azerbaijanis is very low, and rapidly decreasing. Among Georgians, distances toward Turks are on middle distances and is approaching to the high distances range, 0.6. For Georgian Armenians, we create two trends, with and without 2009. If we look on trend with 2009, we will see the descending trend, but without that data, we see a rapidly ascending trend. Here you see the trend of social distances towards Iranians. Now let's look at the structure of the relationship between the perceptions of social distances among Georgians, Georgian Armenians, and Georgian Azerbaijanis. Here you see the results of component analysis of social distances of Georgians, Georgian Armenians, and Georgian Azerbaijanis by enforced three-component solution. The main parameters are with high loadings are in red. The bridging parameters with moderate loadings are in black. And the empty cells denote low loadings. When the component analysis is done with the condition eigenvalues more than 1, then for Georgians and Georgian Armenians, we got two-component models. And for Georgian Azerbaijanis, a three-component model. It should be noted that all these models have huge first components. Besides, you see that all the solutions have many bridging parameters. It means that there are several layers which can be revealed by increasing the number of extracted components. In order not to load the presentation with many models, a clustering of overall component analysis solutions is done. Those clusters are presented on the slides 20, 21, and 22. Let's look, for example, the clustering dendrogram of overall component analysis of social distances perceived by Georgians. On the scale distance 25, you can see two clusters, Georgians as one cluster and all others and the second cluster. It is consistent to the social distance pattern of Georgians in 2019, which we see on slide 6. On the distance 10, you can see three clusters, Georgians, Christians, and Islamic ethnic groups, which is consistent to the three-component solution which we see on the previous slide. Here, three components. You can, by yourself, continue exploring of this dendrogram and dendrograms for Armenians and for Georgian Azerbaijanis. This is dendrogram for Georgian Armenians, and this is the dendrogram of Georgian Azerbaijanis. Now, let's speak about main findings. At first, about civilizational rift. The religious affiliation or civilizational factor is the most fundamental factor determining the social distance perceptions among Georgians, Georgian Armenians, and Georgian Azerbaijanis. Because of this, the patterns of social distances of Georgians and Georgian Armenians toward ethnic groups are very close to each other and are significantly different from patterns of Azerbaijanis. Thus, the civilizational rift passes not only through the southern Caucasus, but also directly through Georgia and Georgian society. About regional neighborhood, about Russians. In 2007, Georgians perceived Russians as the closest ethnic group, and the social distance perception towards Russians were conditioned by a separate Russian factor. In 2009, after the 2008 war, this distance sharply increased, but from 2011 it began decreasing. A new increase occurred in 2019, maybe after political events of that year. In 2019, Russian factor among Georgians was less pronounced, and Russians are incorporated in a wider Christian factor. Social distances toward Russians is significantly low and decreasing among Georgian Armenians, and significantly high and is increasing among Georgian Azerbaijanis. About Turks. For Georgian Azerbaijanis, Turks are very close ethnic group. The social distance toward Turks among Azerbaijanis is very low and is rapidly decreasing. Social distances towards Turks among Georgians and Georgian Armenians are high, and when excluding the 2019 data, are increasing, especially among Georgian Armenians. About Americans, when excluding the 2019 data for Georgian Armenians, the social distance perceptions toward Americans among Georgian Armenians and Georgian Azerbaijanis are increasing. Now about within Georgia relations. The social distances among Georgian Azerbaijanis toward all ethnic groups except Turks are very high, and especially high towards Armenians. The general trend of these distances is an increase. Compared to Georgians and especially Georgian Azerbaijanis, the social distance perception towards all ethnic groups among Georgian Armenians are significantly low. And finally, about Caucasus neighborhood. Among Georgian Armenians and Georgian Azerbaijanis, the same patterns of distances exist towards South Caucasus neighbors of Georgia, Armenians and Azerbaijanis. That is all that I want to show you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Now we have some time left for your questions and discussion, but so far I don't see any questions except the one that Dustin already answered, which was about whether the last wave of Armenia dataset is available. So can I please ask the participants if there are any questions to the five presenters? While we are waiting for other questions, I would like to ask Tamuna Indrati, if I may, one technical question. When you described your variables and presented your dependent variable, did you try to use other measures of support for democracy in your models, like use other dependent variables, and if so, whether you got similar results or something was different? Because we have, if I remember correctly, a few questions, like 3 questions, which more or less measure support for democracy.
Thank you, Tina. So we didn't explicitly went to testing our hypothesis using other questions, but when playing with the data, so more or less same results were across different types of independent variables. We also wanted to show, so initial plan was to compare value-oriented support and the so-called instrumental-oriented support for democracy. Unfortunately, the type of data in the CB, so it could not make us possible to fully measure and operationalize instrumental support, and we are thinking of other ways of measuring or using other type of data for that. But thank you for your insight regarding the application of other types of democracy support. We will try to play again with the data and to see whether these results can be replicated to other and so replicated when it comes to the other way of operationalization of democracy support.
Thank you. So what do we do? I can't believe these presentations did not lead to more questions.
Tina, there is one more question on YouTube, and it's
Okay.
why 2019 data makes so much difference about the Armenian data, I think. The question is addressed to last presenter. I will copy it now in the chat.
Well, I guess it should not be so I think Ella can also try to answer these questions. So either Ella or Samuel, if you have any insight about the reason for the difference of the last wave in Armenia.
Big difference with regards to. Sorry, I didn't get.
I think it was addressed to the last presenter. To
if you go to chat. It's a different presentation. One. Okay.
May I answer?
Yes, please.
I think the problem is the sample size. You see sample size in absolute numbers for Azerbaijani Armenians in Georgia. We have a very little sample size here and, here and here. And if we look on the probability that we can get a biased sample, there is probability. And I think that it is, maybe it is biased sample because the number of people here is much lower than in other parts. I think this can be, because when I look the decrease of variables on approval of marriage, from 2017 up to 2019, the decrease was 35%. It is impossible to have this sort of decrease about very deep dispositions. Approval of marriage is a very deep disposition, and it can't have so big changes in 2 years. That's why I think that we have a sample problem. This is my point of view. Maybe others have other explanations. When I was working on this investigation, and I see that sharp decrease, I asked CRRC Armenia to ask to use CRRC Georgia in order to understand this problem with joint forces. And I am I want to understand this problem with Georgian CRRC.
However, this does not answer the question, I'm afraid, because the question was different. The question, as I read it, is there a significant linear correlation between social distancing and religion? And then there is another question, why 2019 data makes so much difference?
It is a question to me?
Yes, both, yeah.
I can't ask on this question because I say that I think that it is subsample problem, and that is why I always make two trend lines with 2019 and without 2019, and all my colleagues can by themselves use the first or the second trend lines.
But what about the first question about religion? Hello? Samuel?
Yes, yes, I hear you.
So I'm trying to repeat the first question that was about religion. If you saw it, you can see it in the chat.
If you allow me to share screen, I will show it.
Of course.
Do you see my presentation?
Yes.
Look here, the three component analysis. For Georgians, we have three factors. Georgians as a national component, we see that Georgians are a very separate group from all others. Here we have Islamic factor for Iranians, Arabians, Indians, Turks, Kurds, Azerbaijanis, and Georgian Azerbaijanis, which have high loadings on this factor. And factor for Christians, you see here the Christian, the ethnic groups. Indians and Jews are here because of 2 points. I say that these factors are very give very many bridging parameters, and these Indians and these Jews have bridging are bridging parameters for all others. And you can see that the Christian and Islamic factors are revealing also for Georgian Armenians and Georgian Azerbaijanis. For Islamic factor for Armenians, Turks, Iranians, Arabs, Indians, Kurds, Azerbaijanis, and so on. When we make 4 or 5 or 6 component analysis, the Azerbaijanis and Abkhazians are separating from this. This we can see here. This is the 2 component analysis, Armenians and all others. This is the second analysis, third, and so on. And you can here look and see that who are closer, who are further for Armenians, for Georgian Armenians, and how they are clustering, how they are grouping in much or less groups. The same you can see for Georgians, the same you can see for Azerbaijanis. That is why I make factor analysis of these social distances for practically all the Caucasus barometer surveys, and the civilizational factors are always revealed in all the surveys. Up to 2013, where Azerbaijanis also are participating in Caucasus barometer, I make that analysis also for Azerbaijanis, and civilizational or religious factor is revealed also for Azerbaijanis in Azerbaijan.
Thanks. If I just may make a comment here, is that I just don't think that the sampling of Georgian Armenians and Georgian Azerbaijanis was representative. So you might want to consider very, very carefully whether the findings for these 2 groups have any indication of representativeness, because you might end up with very unreliable findings here. So I don't know if we don't have any other questions. We might wrap up slightly earlier if it's okay. Will Matzo?
Yes, let's just stay in the meeting for 30 seconds because the YouTube live is a little bit lagging behind. So if there are any other questions there, I will let you know. 30 seconds.
Okay, and thank you very much to all the presenters, because this was very interesting, and I guess I personally missed Caucasus barometer quite a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panel presenters, speakers, participants. Thank you very much for being here, having questions. I hope there will be more questions in the next sessions. People will be warmed up a little bit. Now we will go for a break and we'll be back at 1 p.m. So don't go too far, and we'll be back at 1 p.m. with the panel 1, which is on memory, rights, identities, and values in the South Caucasus. Thank you. Half an hour break. And we are back. Hello again. Now we start with the panel 1, Memory, Rights, Identities, and Values in the South Caucasus. The panel is moderated by Nhyութի from the Free University of Tbilisi. Nhyութի, I made you a co-host. Some of the panel speakers had issues, but I think they are all here now. And we should start, I will give the floor to Nhyութի first, and then we will start with the first presentation. Nhyութի, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, I forgot to unmute myself.
Okay, great.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. It's always a pleasure to attend any of the CRRC events and especially to be a part of it. I've listened to very interesting presentations in the previous session, and I'm looking forward to this, to our session that looks very interesting to me on memory, rights, identities, and values in the South Caucasus. And I'm looking forward to, we will talk here about role of language policy and transformation of rites and rituals, and what is now a big topic around the world, the moving around of statues and the policy, the monuments policies, how monuments move around has always been an issue in the South Caucasus, and it's become now an issue for the entire world. And generally memory, it's a big part of memory politics. And finally, I think Levan Tarknishvili's presentation will give us some sense of how these culturally shaped political processes that are very local and localized gain some kind of point of tangency with more universalistic approaches to values and social development and so forth. So I will not take any more of the session's time. I'm pleased to announce our first presenter, Vardan Petrosyan from Armenia University. Am I saying it right? He will talk about language policy models and identity construction for the former Soviet countries. So I give you the floor. I have two screens, so that's why I'm looking in two directions. I'm sorry, that confuses.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Is it? I am new for the Zoom conference, and do you see my screen, please?
We see your screen. You would just need to start the presentation and then just go about it the regular way.
Is this now is okay? My PowerPoint presentation is okay?
Yeah, you just have to push on play from start on the top of your screen, and it will, yes, yeah, yes. That's it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this participating in this conference, for your invitation. I see the organization is excellent. Though online, I think this is a very good organization, and I saw your previous presentations, very nice, very good. I liked all of them. Thank you very much. Now, my title is Language Policy, Models and Identity Construction for it was for Kyrgyzstan, but I saw a lot of parallels with Georgia and Armenian as well. And so I will trace those parallels during my presentation. My name is Vardan Petrosyan. I am from Kyrgyzstan, and I'm an editor of this website. So this is our regions. As you see, on the left side, Central Asian region, it's border with China, Russia, and then the Caucasus region. And while Central Asia can have a regional identity based on language, our languages are mutually understandable. In the Caucasus, your languages are very different from each other, but still there is a hope and there is an opportunity to develop regional identity. Why regional identity? Because need to deal with the external imperialistic forces to keep our to talk with them on the high levels, on equal levels. So both regions, I think, need regional identities to talk with China, Turkey, Russia, and Iran, other powers. So I'd like to talk around this question. What are the main correlations between language policies and identity construction in Kyrgyzstan? I have edited a little bit. It's relevant for Eurasia as well. So the method was mainly diachronic study of language policies. I mean, from historical perspectives, from time perspectives, looking back. And I had also interviews and survey on this website. But in this presentation, I will be able to present only the first diachronic study of language policies. And first of all, I'd like to highlight that language policy is important for identity construction at the ethnic level and at the state level and regional levels. At the ethnic levels, I think in the case of Armenia, for example, you have very few ethnic minorities, but for Georgia, it's still important because your minorities constitute about, I think, about 70%. And then you need to build a state level identity so that all minorities would feel belonging to the state, would be patriotic about Georgia, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan as well. For Kyrgyzstan, we have also significantly reduced, but all the Caucasian nations are in our states still living: Chechens, Armenians, Georgians, even Estonians. Some Estonians are still there, and even Germans, because of the politics. And then we all need want all of them to feel that Kyrgyzstani, Georgian, Armenian, our titular groups want them integrate and want them to speak the same language and so on. But in my presentation, I think the regional level also important, because we feel in Kyrgyzstan there are increasing interest from China and from Arabic countries, from Russia still there, and then the other small country we can't resist, we can't talk with them on the equal position. I think the same is for Georgians, for Armenians. So we need to find a language policy model that would be strategically useful for Eurasia. And here I would like to just share what language policies exist and existed in the world. First, the old European ideology, one nation, one language, is now not existent anymore in Europe. I am now speaking from Hungary, and I see the huge differences between Central Europe and Western Europe, and Eastern Europe is totally another planet from this point of view. The old European ideology before Hitler, it was very interesting, and but now European Union has 21 official languages. So current European ideology is multilingualism. They encourage other languages to join and make sure that their languages are functioning. So how this multilingualism would work for our countries, let's talk next slides. Now, I'd like a little bit highlight these models. There are 3 models I wanted to highlight, which came from my studies of documents in the European Union and Central Asia and former Soviet Union, that monolingualism, if you choose the monolingualism language policy to promote only the titular language of our country, Armenian, Georgian, Kyrgyz, or Uzbek, then that may hinder construction of regional identity. We can't build on this, we can't build a more stronger regional identity on monolingualism in our nation states. Next version is B, is bilingualism with a supranational language, but that may lead to language shift. I mean, language shift is language death. since if we choose another supranational language, let's say Russian or English or any other language, the next generation may choose this supranational language and just leave the heritage ancestors language on the home use, on the community level, and it may lead gradually to the decline of this language. But if you choose one language, for example, Uzbek, or for Central Asia, Kazakh, or maybe Armenian or Georgian, nobody will agree. Nobody will agree to integrate on the basis of one titular language. So third version is trilingualism with English. This is the possible option, because it provides the room for national languages. I'll explain why trilingualism with English and with another supranational language would be more suitable for our countries to integrate more on a regional level and to talk on equal basis with Russia, with China, with other Turkey and other countries. So first, before going to that, I'd like to a little bit highlight the advantages of trilingualism for regions, Caucasus and for Central Asia. First, 3 languages removes communication barriers between smaller nation states in the former Soviet countries. If our next generation will speak in 3 languages, international languages, they will be better, easier to integrate. I think it's understandable. And the trilingualism may develop stronger regional identity. We have, of course, Central Asian identity and Caucasian identity. And Moscow, they say, Litso-Kavkazская национальности, but that carries a negative connotation. And for our too, a lot of things are negative. But we need to strengthen that regional identity on positive, more stronger basis on the Caucasian identity too. But trilingualism helps in this case, I think, as is based on my analysis. And it better resists linguistic imperialism. Linguistic imperialism is a term for English. Another name is language killer, where English is coming, then there is the titular languages are dying. But in the case of former Soviet Union, coming of English in parallel with other supranational languages like Russian will not serve as language killer. It will balance and give a room for national languages to develop. So I'd like a little bit highlight, do I have how much time? So highlight a little bit later findings on multilingualism if someone has some doubts or some, how to say, negative attitudes towards multilingualism. First of all, in Europe, the later research says that multilingualism is helpful, have some advantages in learning other languages. If a person knows his own heritage language, that person can learn the second language very easily. And third language will be even more easier because of metalinguistic awareness, the knowledge of linguistic structure and parts of speech and so on. That will be more easier to learn next languages. It's easier. Second is the scholars found that multilingualism, there is a significant correlation between multilingualism and cognition, with the smartness, with brain. And then they found that this executive function, which is located in the brain, in prefrontal cortex, which is called Broca area. In multilinguals, that area works more intensively. And because they need to switch off one language to speak in another language. And it works as a training. And as a result, this Broca area, prefrontal cortex, needs more blood supply and increases the white matter and gray matter. And they learn, their brain works better in this area. As you know, the brain has Wernicke area for language processing and then Broca area for language production. So in multilinguals, there is certain advantages in the prefrontal cortex. And the advantages of latest findings of European, American, and other scholars are multilingualism positively correlates with mental health. the research was, the finding was presented when scholars analyzed hospital, and then multilinguals came there 4 or 5 years later. So, I mean, the dementia and Alzheimer is postponed in multilinguals for 4 years or 5 years later come they, because they use their brain intensively, languages use their brain intensively. When the brain works intensively, it postpones mental health. So it's good for your health. And next, another advantage is that multilingualism provides helps to intercultural understanding, better intercultural understanding. I don't think you need more explanation on this. And next, conclusion. So we need English at the academic. Why English? We need English at academic level because English is the language of science, education, and since most educational scientific resources are in English, and this way we empower our nation, our population, our next generation. When they're empowered, they're educated. Am I on the, okay? And they can talk with others. It's beneficial for our population. Next is Russian or any other neighbor languages on communication level, since it's still de facto lingua franca in the former Soviet Union, and then titular language at the professional level, Georgian in Georgia, Armenian in Armenia, since it helps to communicate with the majority. At the same time, minority languages as medium of instructions should be taught, because these minority languages need to feel themselves as belonging to the nation state, to Georgia, to Armenia, to feel they're patriotic. If you prohibit their languages, they will feel exclusion, and they will think that these are not my country, and they will, they will less patriotic. That's why teaching as a medium of instruction in regions will help Georgia, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan to strengthen their state actually. So thank you very much. I think, and I can answer questions or go further.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. As I understand, we will go to the Q&A session in the end, unless there is some clarification question right now, and we will move to the next presenter.
Thank you very much.
Let's have Q&A session in the end, and meanwhile we can collect questions via our chat in Zoom.
So we will now move to our next presenter. I lost the Zoom window. Our next presenter is Sumbat Hakobian from the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography and Armenian National Academy of Sciences, and he will be talking about transformation of rituals and rites. His presentation is titled New Places, New Rituals, How Funeral Houses Transform the Ritual. So floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
And so traditionally during last even ages, funerals took place in homes, and mostly the home was the place where this ritual occurred, and the home was the place which determined the elements, structure, and functions of the ritual. So funerals were tightly related with home environment, with the conditions, and with its neighborhood. it was very much communal ritual, because in this ritual, many neighbors, friends, and relatives participated. And you can see this happened like until recently. Even now it happens, but it starts to change, not dramatically but gradually. And it can be described, funerals which took place in houses, as public events. So it was very much open for public observation. A lot of people who were not participants of the ritual itself could witness how some people were buried. So started from 2015, many funeral houses were built, and rituals started to move from houses to these funeral houses, which are called in Armenia like grieving houses, but the English term for this place is funeral houses, so I will use this term. And while I was observing the rituals, I noticed that many things has changed ever since. So my research question is, what changed due to this shift? And I collected data, ethnographic data, from 2013 till now, and I will make my conclusions and observations based on that. So I want to refer to ritual place theory developed by scholar Jonathan Z. Smith. So he claims that rituals, the place, geographical place, is very important thing for ritual. The place determines the elements of ritual, its structure, its function. For example, if it takes place in church, the physical characters of the church, but not only physical, will dictate what kind of ritual we will have. If it takes place in such a shrine, that shrine will dictate the rules. If it takes place in some open area, that place will bring rituals, elements, or structure. So this is not geographical determinism, because the place in this sense is not just bare physical location. It is it has also cultural meaning, symbolic meaning. So when we are talking about place, it is not only its physical characters, we are talking also about cultural elements. So when I observed these rituals in funeral houses, I noticed some differences in comparison with funerals in homes. So one of those is the change of structure and process. So the dynamics of the ritual has changed quite dramatically. So in houses, people were constantly involved in the process of ritual. They were engaged in constant grieving or interaction with the body, the people who grieve, mourners, with the elements of ritual, with material elements of ritual, be that the coffin, the wreaths, or the photograph of the deceased. So there is constant involvement in the ritual in this case. But when it moves to funeral houses, you see that the intensity declines. People are not always involved in the process of ritual. There are some times when you are involved, you visit the funeral houses either in the day of one day after the death, so and 2 days after the death when the very burial takes place. So mostly you are involved like maybe 2 or 3 hours, but in case of houses, that time is much more larger. So, and also in houses, ritual takes place in the place wherever that life occurs. So some people lay down and sleep in the very house where the body is set. So, so you can see that due to this change, people were kind of shy away death. So the death has become more distant than in houses. Another interesting change is disappearance of magical or symbolic rituals or ceremonies, which you could witness in houses normally. So I call this magical or symbolic rituals because they are linked to some so-called paranormal beliefs or actions that are directed towards that beliefs. So clock stopping is one of those. So when someone dies, usually people stop the clock at the very hour of death, hour and minute of death. So it's symbolic action. Hitting the door with the coffin, which I would say it was disappearing already before even these changes. But in some places, especially in rural areas, you could witness that. So when they took the coffin out of house, they hit the door 3 times, or people cover the mirror or every reflecting object in houses. Some people interpret this action as they want to, by means of this action, to not allow the soul of disease to appear in the mirror. The spinning of the coffin is another ceremony which people were used to do once they took out the coffin out of the house. So it was spinning 3 times, and by many people, by interpretation of many people, the meaning of this action was that they wanted to prevent the disease to return, its soul to return to house. So it was kind of messing. And in general, more institutional ritual counts, and we see that folk beliefs and folk rituals, folk practices are declining. Another change happened concerning to grieving and emotional expression during the ritual. In the houses, one can witness that a lot of people, especially women, are weeping and mourning and crying loudly. Even in front of houses, in yards, when they put the coffin down on some table and express their last wishes and say their goodbyes. But in funeral houses, I noticed that emotional expression is much lesser. So people are not grieving so intensively. They are not expressing that much emotions. And this can be compared to what happened to this practice in Western countries, especially in the United States, for example, you can witness this change of grieving when in 1920s, funeral houses appeared, and death, which was public before that, has become more private, and the grieving itself has become more private and less emotional. So there are this kind of changes in the ritual. And I would say that my study and my data kind of approves Smith's theory that place indeed plays a very significant and pivotal role for rituals, and it determines the structure, the elements and functions of many ceremonies. And we can see that now we have more institutional and modern funerals. When I say modern, I mean modernistic rituals, not traditional ones. And that's all. That's are my conclusions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting presentation, and a topic is itself very engaging. I myself probably have a dozen of questions that I want to ask at the end of our presentations. So we now move to our next presenter, Anahit Gharibian, from Research Center for East European Studies, University of Bremen, and we'll hear a presentation about memory map of Soviet era monuments, the powerless symbols and power of the past. The floor is yours. We look forward to the presentation.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for very interesting topics and presentations. I have very I have so many topics to cover, that's why I skipped lots of them, but I hope to have enough time to speak about all of the topics I planned. Just a few minutes for sharing my presentation. Let me see. Okay. My presentation. I'm sorry. Can I have some? Okay. My presentation is about memory map of Soviet era monuments, and my topic is divided into two parts. First of all, I would like to present digital map of interactive map of Soviet era monuments, which I conducted nearly 5 years ago. But after that, I collected lots of information and data during my field work, and you can see the methodology with which I work. And I can say that I combined the digital mapping methods with the traditional methods that we use in social sciences. What is the main idea of my research? The research was about the symbolic acts and symbolism of Soviet era monuments. And I can say that in Armenia we have lots of Soviet era monuments. During the historical transformations, the Soviet symbols becomes ideologically powerless, but they still have superior status on the whole country. Nearly in every region in our country, we can meet Soviet monuments, and it means that the existence of Soviet ideology is very high. And currently, they lose their power neither in the physical dimension nor in the people's mindset that associates the symbols with the welfare and the power of the Soviet past. So my research is mainly about the peculiarities of Soviet era monuments built in Armenia and the visual illustration of them with the aid of interactive maps. The main issue of the topic is that the Soviet symbols and the Soviet era monuments have still a great power in our society. That's why I attempted to map and analyze the Soviet symbolic acts, the rules, and the fate of monuments built in Armenia. All of the monuments were cited and combined in an interactive map, as you can see in the cover, with the aid of geographical software tools. When I plan to make a printed version of this map, as you can see in the following slide. And this version I conducted with the aid of Google Maps. In addition, during my research, I conducted also, as I say, face-to-face interviews by using oral history methodology. In my presentation, it's a pity, but I can't show and discuss the general findings about the memories that I collected, but I will show the general path and power of the Soviet era monument in Armenia. In 2 words, I eager to share my personal experience when mapping monuments. Firstly, the simplicity of this method has helped me make the data more classified and visualized. But generally, digital maps don't allow to preserve the copyright of the pictures and the information collected from the storytellers. So all of the whole map has some layers, as you can see, and there are content, and you can see in each layer how much points there are. This means that in each layer we have, for example, memorials dedicated to the victims of Soviet repressions, 9 points. It means that only 9 monuments are summarized in the map. So the first, besides the map, parallelly I started to investigate the roots, and the first question of my research was to find out the roots of the Soviet monuments. And the research question concerns about the how they start to build Soviet era monuments. But within my interviews, I found out that some of the Soviet era monuments have roots in pre-Sovietization of the country. This was very interesting because there are so many friendship monuments in our country that becomes the place where people gather for celebrating the anniversaries, for example, October Revolution or other Soviet celebrations. And it was very common for our country to have such kind of friendship monuments. And even during the Sovietization of the country, we can see that even during the Soviet time, we can see that they built lots of monuments dedicated to the not only for the friendship, but also dedicated to the anniversaries of joining Armenia or parts of Armenia to Russia. These political circumstances also are currently used. These political circumstances can be seen nowadays. In this respect, it is worth recalling the opening of the United Cross statue in the urban Sphinx-shaped park on 20 December 2013. The opening ceremony of the monument, which symbolizes Armenian-Russian friendship, took place 2 months after the Eastern Partnership Summit in Vilnius, where Armenia refused to sign the initial association agreement with EU, and Armenian President Sargsyan announced that the country had decided to join Russia-led customs union. But we see not only the power of the monument coming from the past, but also their symbolic transmissions, and even I mean that they reincarnate across time. Let's go on and see what kinds of monuments were built during the Soviet occupation. So it was very common for our country Before the Second World War, during Stalin's cult of personality, the monuments to revolutionary figures, party leaders, the anniversary of Armenia's Sovietization, October Revolution, and as well as the young Bolshevik members of the resistance movement. All of these kinds of monuments were erected throughout the country. But after the Second World War, and also I have said that there was very common the status anniversary celebration of the October Revolution. But after the collapse of the but after the Second World War, the main great deal of the Soviet monuments in Armenia became victory monuments. In my research and doing my research and due to interactive math, approximately 625 memorial monuments, as you can see in printed version of the map, have been constructed for the victims of the Second World War. All of the monuments that I mentioned, approximately 640 monuments were built in Armenia, and in my map you can find information about around 620. It means that all of the monuments are kept in nowadays. And nowadays these monuments and symbols have tremendous cultural, social, and even political impact on the social and environmental levels. On the other hand, after the Second World War, victory monuments tended to fulfill the daily needs of the people. As you can see, there are lots of memorial fountains of the victims of the war. After the collapse of Soviet Union, the government of Armenia continues to reproduce the power of Soviet symbols, thus constructing up to 10 new monuments to the victims of Second World War. And the last one was erected in 2015. And now we have approximately five monuments to the victims of Second World War. And some of them are devoted to Soviet authorities and friendships, as I mentioned before. These constructions not only have an impact on physical space, but also are connected on the ideological, political, and social cultural themes. But let's return to the first decades of Soviet era. During the Stalin epoch, the development of country was filled with incredible huge projects and programs. It concerns also the architecture and building construction as well. For instance, well-known Stalin's projects of buildings and houses. In every country, I think there are so many houses with Stalin's projects. In that time, all of the monuments had to have powerful existence in the landscape and surroundings. In this regard, I would like to mention the statue of Lenin erected on Republic Square of Yerevan by the prominent Soviet sculptor Merkurov in 1940. He later became the author of the biggest statue of Stalin among all Soviet Union countries. The monument to Stalin built in Yerevan, as you can see in the picture, has very tremendous and influential place, and it was situated on the top of the well-seen hill. And now, and not only now, but it was notable from every corner of the city center. And this position asserted the power, and this power can be felt even nowadays. Even though Stalin's statue was replaced and the statue of Mother Armenia, as you can see in this picture, is standing on its place, you can see some similar attributes on the appearances. Let's observe it. In both statues, you see no movement, no emotions, and excitement. For instance, comparing it with the statue of Mother Georgia and or for me, very movable statue of Mother of Russia, you can easily notice the differences. Position and attitude of past statues, recent Mother Armenia, are closed and have triangle form, as you can see here. Even I noticed that you can see the similarities of dress folds here for Stalin statue and Mother Armenia statue. And if we examine the landscape of the statue, we can even see Stalin wandering there. I think it's not correct, but even nowadays we used to call this place monument, which is coming from the past memories that there was standing a monument to the so-say God of the nations. The method before erecting the Mother Armenia statue, the pedestal was left empty for 5 years. Then a new spirit with a new symbolism appeared on the site of Stalin statue in the form of 22-meter Mother Armenia. But now, inside of the memorial building, inside of this pedestal, was opened a museum dedicated to Armenians' participation in the Great Patriotic War. And even nowadays, I think that the environment and all of the surroundings of the Mother Armenia statues, you can feel the Soviet past that exists. Since the museum exhibitions mainly devoted to the World War II and political warfare with Russia. How it ends, I can say that we can notice the end of the Soviet people, even if we observe the monument dismantling, the process of dismantling of the monuments. For example, one of the most iconic monuments to the collapse of the 70-year-old Soviet Union became the dismantling of Lenin's statue, as you can see in the picture, which brought joy to so many and